2 of the Book of Practical Faith, which is gathering trust. Gathering trust is necessary for faith to be more than a pretense or naive fantasy. Faith grows from daily acts and decisions of trust, islands of clarity, peacefulness, and responsibility in this world of chaos. The capacity for trust rests chiefly on one's own trustworthiness. It's far easier to find reasons to trust others when you have every reason to trust yourself. Thus, the key to gathering trust in one's own commitment to truthfulness and personal honor. A commitment necessarily leavened with compassion for human frailty and forgiveness of the human tendency to fail. Strengthening one's own honor and truthfulness in a world shot through with illusions and deceptions is the first faith-building step that is tinged with transcendence. To be trustworthy is to go against the grain of a cynical culture, and, some would say, against human nature itself. Thus, to extend trust from the foundation of personal honor is to foster a vision of a new human nature. The work of becoming more trustworthy cannot rely solely on moral campaigns for self-improvement, although they are necessary at times. Rather, the work must be fundamentally inspired by recognizing that we are absolutely accepted by God. Only God loves unconditionally, for God originates in a reality without conditions, contradictions, or incompleteness. To begin accepting God's infinite love is to begin making our own reality less conflicted, more sensible and dependable, more whole and reassuring. Feeling the acceptance of God take root within us enables us to become more trustworthy because we directly experience the rewards of serving truth and reliability. We feel smarter, sharper, more peaceful, and forgiving. By contrast, merely telling ourselves to be good engenders tension and inner conflict. It lacks foundation or substance. Believing in goodness is no good without accepting the total patient love of God. To accept the love of God, begin to imagine it. Perfect acceptance and support without judgment, and an infinite wisdom that corrects with compassion, not condemnation. What you will seem to be imagining is actually the recollected memory of divine affection. Then imagine that great affection entering and opening your heart. When this act of imagination, this mystical memory, begins to yield feelings of release, gratitude, and wonder, then the spiritual work of gathering trust is well underway. Gathering trust then begins with the remembrance of God. Because our world is ruled by forgetfulness, an agonizing loss of memory about our source. The remembrance of God is a revolutionary act. And the gathering of trust is a continuous uprising against the world of belief in loss and abandonment. The silent partner of trust is skepticism. Trust and skepticism. The silent partner of trust is skepticism. This partnership is not as paradoxical as it may sound at first. Because people perpetuate countless illusions upon themselves and others, a trusting vision must be sharp and discerning, for there is no use in trusting illusions as reality. You can, however, trust illusions as illusions. What a healthy skepticism contributes to faith is a sense of intuitive direction and wise choice. Skepticism, pursued for its own sake, however, will run amok and mutate into a cynical outlook on life. This outlook retards the maturing of trust and replaces faith with a bitter shadow of itself. Unfortunately, cynical skepticism is far more prominent these days than skepticism in its right proportion, yoked firmly to the service of trust. The role of skepticism is not to condemn that which is found to be untrustworthy, but to clarify one's appreciation of what is real and genuinely useful. My experience as an investigative reporter taught me that when skepticism becomes tiring and feels like a drag on the spirit, then it has gotten out of proportion and should be reined in. It's tempting to regard this skepticism fatigue, in quotes, as a justified world weariness, the unavoidable burden of looking upon a landscape of misery and wrongdoing. This is an occupational hazard for cops and reporters. But faith uses skepticism only to correctly identify errors, illusions, and deceptions. And then it looks upon those problems with mercy and the readiness to ask for divine assistance. The highest use of skepticism is to question the very reality of the world, to ask if this is how God intended things to be. If we suspect that God did not intend our reality, then we may rightly suspect its authenticity. If life is but a dream, a keen-eyed faith is the key to our awakening. Trust versus worry. Gathering trust requires a willingness to give up worrying. This is a discipline that can perhaps never be entirely mastered, but its effects are cumulative and can make a dramatic difference in one's life. Gathering trust, I worry about 90% less than I used to, and I trust people, fate, and the world of our existence that much more. By progressively surrendering the habit of worry, I have gained a much greater peace than I used to think was possible. And the potential for less worry and still greater peace seems limitless. Limitless, indeed. I have learned to ask myself whenever I find myself slipping into worry, will this anxiety solve the problem at hand? Invariably, the answer is no. What will solve the problem is attention and creativity, both of which work best in the absence of anxiety. Since I know that high-quality attention and creativity come from deep within, from a mystical source greater than my ordinary self, then I can use worry as a signal that I am trying to trust only myself, when I need to trust a greater resource. Tricky. To release worry is to say, I recognize that I cannot solve the problem at hand by myself. I commit the problem to God, to all of the creative resources within that are beyond my comprehension. And then it is time to wait, quietly, respectfully, and with keen alertness. When one's inner resources offer up a solution to the problem at hand, the creative work can begin. This work will constructively use the energy that worry would otherwise have wasted. Wherever worry can be challenged and its energy redirected in this way, the seeds of trust can be planted. It is a momentous process whose difficulty is matched only by the wonders of its gains. To gather trust within oneself is to sow peace in the world at large. Releasing worry through forgiveness. We all tend to pick a favorite target for our biggest worry. It's the one person or phenomenon that obviously can't be trusted and therefore must be anxiously turned over and over in our minds, regardless of whether that process yields any useful results. which it generally doesn't. You know that. I suppose many people worry the most about particular relationships because they have the greatest difficulty learning to trust certain other individuals. A major worry of my adult life has been about money. Only recently have I realized that finding a way to trust money is a struggle to trust people in the abstract, as a society, a culture, and a civilization. Nowadays, I see money as a medium of respect and communication. How we hold it, hoard it, use it, or waste it reflects what we are saying to one another. As individuals, groups, organizations, and nations, about how deserving of continued existence and support we believe one another to be. Considering what goes on with the money these days, mutual respect seems to be in short supply among human beings. Sad to see. The inequities of our monetary system are undeniable expressions of our collective fear about survival and our alienation from one another. Through the confrontation and negotiation of recurring worry about money, I have learned that it's necessary to forgive the lunacy of our monetary system in order to live sensibly within it. To forgive, it is necessary to get up close to the objects of one's fear, sorrow, or resentment. Once when I was quite ill and financially desperate, I fell into a delirious half-sleep where I saw my fear about money in the form of an enormous, scowling stone face, a graven image in the middle of a dark jungle. At a certain distance, its visage and presence were terrifying. But in my anxious reverie, I saw myself crossing the clearing in front of this harsh god, finally coming up so close to it that I could see the lines of its face were just intriguing designs in the wall of a rock. And then I realized that I could get footholds and handholds in the indentations of this wall and climb it. After our arduous trek upwards, I pulled myself over the top of the wall and discovered, much to my surprise, a vast sunny meadow that afforded me feelings of abundance and well-being. This vision was an authentic miracle of my inner life. The first time I had sensed the possibility of healing a major wound in my psyche and of transforming a paralyzing fear. I can't say that a big check arrived the next day or that my financial situation improved significantly over the next few months, but from that day forward, I began suffering less within myself regarding my financial circumstances. My vision, creativity, and resourcefulness began improving as a result, eventually pulling me out of the depths of financial crisis. During the dark days of my money troubles, I believed that too much of it went to the wrong places for all the wrong reasons, and that I was only one victim of the system among many. I still believe the system is insane. There is too much evidence not to think otherwise. This seems to me a proper use of skepticism, and it has saved me from more than once from investing in wild schemes promising financial redemption through fake spiritual idealism about the possibilities of money. But our crazy monetary system has one less victim now, because I have inwardly ceased my own victimization about money. I see it as neither evil nor divine, and thus to be neither avoided nor hoarded. I am personally dedicated to improving my ways of using and communicating with money. I'm also politically committed to seeing that we all learn to improve our communication with it. That is, to balance our traditional notions of fiscal responsibility with a broader sense of social responsibility. What I learned through a years-long struggle with the almighty dollar was an invaluable lesson about ending worry and gathering trust. To trust the world, you must trust yourself first. To trust yourself, you must be willing to forgive the unforgivable. Anything that seems unforgivable is an angry God within you, even if it seems to be outside of you. To overcome an angry God within, it may be necessary to climb the stone face of fear. Yes. Trust and the counting of blessings. Trust is the appreciation extended towards the future. As such, the energy of trust derives from one's reservoir of appreciation for the present. He who finds few blessings to count in the here and now will have a devilishly difficult time trusting the unpredictable future. When you cannot count many blessings, you will count on your narrow expectations to a risky degree. People and events are unpredictable, not because they are inherently untrustworthy, but because we live in the midst of a great mystery. When we decide we can order mystery to suit our plans and purposes, we are setting ourselves up for surprise and betrayal. When we accept a spiritual sense of self arising from an appreciation of the mystery of reality, we can respond to life's twists and turns with an agile adaptability, blaming no one for our disappointments and finding potential even in every catastrophe. Practicing appreciation means counting blessings on a regular basis. For years, I have done this at the end of the day, reviewing the day's events and encounters in an appreciative light. Sometimes my appreciation is necessarily rueful, but I search nonetheless for what I have learned from disappointing turns of fate. I follow this ritual not to be good, but to increase the potency and skillfulness of my trust. For a skillful trust is a great power. A warning: the ritual of counting blessings or any other prayer or meditation that degrades into a pretense of goodness is counterproductive and should be abandoned. A practical faith should always be focused on results, even if some of its results are subtle or can only be perceived in the long term. But a lifeless religious routine can be harmful to the practitioner and encourages cynicism among observers who correctly perceive its fruitlessness. A little warning. Preparing for the best. It is possible to have mistaken expectations, but it's impossible to go and be too trusting, in quotes. Real trust is deepened and informed by disappointments, just as spiritual vision is refined by disillusionment. Trust prepares us for the best by teaching us to prepare for a future far better than what we may merely hope for. Betrayal and trust. What can be done when we are openly and deliberately betrayed? Isn't betrayal a reason to withdraw our trust from other people and from the world in general? Aren't the bitterest people those who have been the most betrayed? Actually, the bitterest people are those who have had the least faith in their own capacity to heal, to change, and to grow. Bitterness arises from the realization that the world has defeated one's hopes or expectations. But bitterness thrives on the belief that no comfort or solution for one's original hurt can ever be found. Some people waste a lot of time waiting bitterly for the past to correct itself, which it will never do. Thus, the bitter person clings to the murky romance of living in defeat. This is an act of self-hatred that the bitter person may actually believe to be some kind of revenge on the past. Believing that you can avenge the past is primarily an avoidance of growing up. To grow up, one must release self-hatred by saying, I do not know enough to judge anyone, including myself. Trust in relationships. I trust my wife absolutely. She can do no wrong, unless she makes a mistake. And I trust her to do that from time to time as well. I also trust myself to make mistakes, but it is one of the ways, though not the only way, thank God, that humans learn. But what if my wife had an affair or told a lie or broke a promise? Regardless of the particular problem, I would trust that she either made a mistake or needed to do whatever she did. In the first case, I would trust that we could both learn something from her mistake. In the second case, I would have to examine why I was out of touch with what she needed. In either case, my trust of her would remain undamaged because my trust does not rely on her behavior. When I first met my wife, I had the passionate sensation that we were destined to help each other, that a divine instinctive will far greater than my own had brought us together for a healing purpose. My trust of her relies on my acceptance of God's will as a benevolent, if ultimately mysterious, creative force that directs my life. My trust needs no other instigation or proof of purchase. Living with a high level of mutual trust does not mean that my wife and I have never hurted or disappointed each other. It does mean that most of the time we don't add to the inevitable pains of relationship with fear or suspicion. Many people seem to relate to each other defensively as a way to ward off anticipated pain, without ever realizing that every moment spent in suspicion and defensiveness is a moment of pain. It is precisely this kind of pain that creates more of itself, and that leads, in fact, to exactly the agonies it ostensibly defends against. Self-fulfilling prophecies. Gotta watch out. It's a trap. Many people enter intimate relationships with an agenda of striking a bargain to reduce or defend their vulnerability. The direction of trust, faith, and love must be towards the sharing of increased vulnerability, for therein lies the greatest intimacy. Whatever we resist revealing to each other forms a barrier to a deeper relationship. And that barrier eventually creates boredom and dismay. By continually sharing our vulnerability, even in halting steps, we can continually recreate our relationships, and thus ourselves. Trusting self and others. It is true, but not always evident. It is always true, but not always evident. We trust one another exactly to the extent at which we trust ourselves. Here is an extreme example. A thug accosts you in the street demanding money at gunpoint. Can you trust him? Apparently not. But what if you could trust yourself to grasp his motivation and desperation so quickly, clearly, and completely that you could disarm him with just your words? What if you perceived his attack as a cry for help, and you knew exactly what to do about it in order to save both of you? If you could trust yourself to this extraordinary extent, then you could trust your attacker to be harmless. I doubt if I could do this, but by no means should this capacity be beyond the pale of possibility. I think it's the capacity we need to be imagining and striving for. In our place of current desire for ever greater vengeance against those who hurt us. And I suspect that the fastest route to this positive capacity is not training in verbal self-defense or negotiating strategies, but in learning to recognize, acknowledge, and surrender the cruel inward attacks we make to ourselves every day. If we are often holding our own hearts at gunpoint, then our spirit withers and our distrust of others grows apace. If we don't learn to take care of our own inner thugs by carefully asking them what they need and firmly explaining to them that their needs must be peacefully served without harm to others, then we will never understand how to effectively deal with thugs on the street. We will then have to commit more and more resources to the vain attempt to lock them all up, a course of action that will only thicken the walls of our soul's prison. Understanding our shadows. I'm always amused when people refer to the vicious killers among us as animals. That strikes me as an insult to animals. After all, they don't kill for kicks, or in the name of God, or because their parents abused them. We should say of a vicious killer, what a human. Our peculiar viciousness as a species is a potential that lies within our consciousness, and we all have that capacity. We also share the potential for a kind of pragmatic understanding of ourselves as individuals and as a species. Does that mean that the safety of the human community relies on our comprehending the depths of the human condition? Yes. Either that, or we continue to live partial, fearful, and guarded lives. The real question is whether we have anything more important to do than to pursue a deep and pragmatic understanding of our shadows and light. Pursuing this knowledge need not displace life's other challenges and tasks. In fact, this pursuit need not be woven into the fabric of everyday life. If we look upon other people's violence as only their failing, and not as our responsibility to heal as a community and as a species, we will continue to descend into a spiral of viciousness. Needs to be woven into the fabric of everyday life. Okay, right. Yes. Okay. The ownership of trust. We do not create our own trust, although it is an inborn capacity. To the extent that we gather and practice trust, we learn the relationship of the divine world to our world. Trust is what God gives completely. The fact that we can either give or withhold trust is proof that we have been entrusted with a divine skill to do with as we will. God gives us a chance to be like or unlike God, trusting us to learn over time which way works better. Trust over time. Like all other spiritual skills, trust is deepened and focused over time. Its potential needs never be frozen as long as we are consciously working to be free of resentments rooted in the past. As at times we may trust immaturely, that is, to trust certain people to do things that they are not yet capable of, or needlessly withhold our trust. But every misstep or stumble can still carry us forward if we are dedicated to cultivating our trust with what we have learned. To trust one's growth requires a progressively greater surrender to one's inner teacher, a guidance both practical and divine. We can tell whether the guidance is genuine rather than delusionary because real guidance will always be altruistic and calming, even if it directs us to do unusual or daring things. Over time, this guidance will help us see that altruism is also self-serving. Authentic service is a service to all, and the development of trust over time leads us into a full service life. In another light, the process of gathering trust is a negotiation with God about how much doubt and self-defense we will yield for the sake of peace and goodwill. In the end, we will give everything away willingly. What we learned from growing trust is exactly why we want to do that.